culture's art, yes? Well, this is even modern art. I mean, you get artists love this story. I don't know why. What's in it for an artist to depict a swan raping a woman? That is weird, right? But so Zeus is a philanderer. His wife, who is Hera, right? And Hera, which is where we get hours from, our English word hours, as far as I understand it. And so she's the goddess of time and order, right? So she's also the goddess of matrimony. She's the one in charge of keeping people happily married. And her husband's out there messing around. More than some precedents, actually. And when you think of it, that's a conflict. So Socrates says, if I'm going to be pious to Zeus, I should fool around with lots of women. If I'm going to be pious to Hera, I should not. So how do I do it? And of course, Euthyphro is stuck. He's apparently never been faced with this problem, right? And as a result, he ends up so confused that Socrates has to help him. And he gives him this famous question. He says, is the pious pious because the gods love it, or do the gods love the pious because it's so pious? Should I try that again? Or did you catch it the first time? Right? What makes it pious? What makes an act pious? Is it the gods wanting you to do that? Or is it that the gods know what pious is and they love that? And actually, if it's the latter, we can figure out what the pious is ourselves instead of listening to the priests. But if, on the other hand, there's something special about the way the priests get this divine message, this is what the gods want. So, for example, in a book by Julian Jaynes, this is kind of neat. So he writes a book called The Beginning of Consciousness, The Origin of Consciousness. In the breakdown of the bicameral mind. The mind has two cameras, two rooms, right? Two sides, right? And we know that the different sides of the brain do different things. And Julian Jaynes suggested that at a certain point, as humans were evolving, certain individuals started hearing voices. We have people today that hear voices, but usually when they do, we try to get help for them. But in ancient days, apparently, the individuals that heard voices were convinced that those voices were somebody outside of them telling them stuff. And so what we've got is a couple of individuals. William James talks about them in the varieties of the religious experience and so on. So there's people like Moses, that hears the voice. Noah hears voices, right? And so on. And so what Julian Jaynes argues is that these individuals are hearing their own thoughts and think that those thoughts are some divine entity telling them what to do. So it's a psychotic kind of situation, actually. Now, today, we still think of the mind as being something of that sort, but we have Ian.
History is full of people like that. I just call them cults.
Or Einstein. Ian McGilchrist is a contemporary British neuroscientist, psychiatrist, argues in several books that yes, throughout history, what we could see is that different periods of time, different parts of the brain really were dominant through those different periods. So this is kind of interesting. So here's who's hearing voices. Socrates is hearing Apollo, but the way Apollo is talking to him is by telling him not to do something. So it's in the negative. Kind of interesting.
Is he hearing Apollo, or is he being told by Apollo's representative?
In his own mind, he's got a voice, and it's what we today would call our conscience. Don't do that. And so this is a new thing that they're trying to describe. And they don't know how to describe it. It seems to them like there's a divine force that's telling them these things. They don't realize it's their own minds that are doing it. This is a theory, so it's kind of interesting. But one of my other favorites is Erich Havelock. When the muse learns to write. There's probably lots of ways to research this too. We actually have this book in our library. It's also neat for me because Erich Havelock had a son named John Havelock who was a friend of mine. Taught political science here, was a lawyer in town. In fact, he was the Attorney General for the state of Alaska in the Egan administration, which was a while ago. John died about 3 years ago, but in any case, it was neat knowing him and knowing that his father was a professor and taught Plato and so on. And they're part really of a group, the Toronto School, which is where he was at a part of the time. The Toronto School was famous for the media is the message. In other words, when you put a kid in front of TV to watch Sesame Street, or in Germany it was Sesamstrasse, right? When you sit your kid in front and they teach the kid, cerrado, abierto, cerrado, abierto, right? And, parents feel like, the kid is learning from this TV show. Good stuff, right? What they pointed out was the main thing that your child is learning is how to watch TV. And that the media has a message all its own, right? And by the way, what's the media what are we doing today? How many of you are using ChatGPT? Or Grok, or any of those? By the way, I recommend that you do start using them. Because that's the next tool. And it's a tool. And if you're not using it, you're not going to be up to date with how the tools work and what you can do with them when you apply for work. Because they're already having a tremendous impact on the work environment. So do look into those. You might find some teachers that say, don't use it. I think, it's just like the internet. A lot of people said, don't let your kids use the internet. Imagine the kids that didn't have the chance to use the internet and how they're going to compete in a world where everyone's using the internet. You can't get around. You can't even get health care without, use your QR code, if you want to get in line. Good luck to you if you don't have a device, right? But here's the interesting thing with regard to Plato. The muse learns to write, points out that the Greeks were learning from things like the Odyssey, or the Iliad, poems. And poems, like the Iliad, for example, I took a course on that once, and it's pretty neat. The Shield of Achilles, right? Achilles, if you're familiar with the Iliad, right? Achilles means no honor. Ach, please, right? So A is Greek for not, right? And Cles is honor. Like Heracles is the glory of Hera, for example. Achilles is no honor. He's been dissed. Who dissed him? Agamemnon, right? Who, by the way, means no, gametes. So basically, Agamemnon is a Greek joke that means dickless. King dickless. They didn't like him. He couldn't even count his own men, right? And of course, he screws everything up, basically, as you can imagine. In fact, what he did that insulted Achilles was after they had a good day of fighting and so on, when they went to Troy, Achilles and others all took a prize. And for Achilles, the prize was Briseis.
We're going to watch the movie Troy.
You can, but not during class.
They reference a lot of that stuff there.
Yeah, but if you think about it, by the way, the movie with Brad Pitt, bad example of the good movie maybe, but Agamemnon dies in that one before he gets home, and that would screw up a whole bunch of Sophoclean plays, right? But in any case, Agamemnon had a prize too. The trouble was the priest came from Troy and said, "You stole my daughter, and the gods are mad at you for that." And of course, Agamemnon believed it. The priest was upset, and what the priest was hearing was, "The gods are upset you took my daughter." So Agamemnon gave her back. And then he's like, "I don't have a prize." And his brother Menelaus says, "Well, take any prize you like. You're the king." So the fool went and took Achilles' prize. And Achilles decided, "I'm not going to fight anymore. That's it for me." And he was the tank, the one that was beating everybody, single-handedly, leading the Greeks to victory. And as a result of him deciding not to go to battle anymore, they start to lose. And everybody says to him, "You got to get Achilles back into the fight." Well, Achilles doesn't want to hear anything. He's Achilles now. He's been dishonored, right? He's got the name. It takes to the middle of the poem, for this. But in any case, so his cousin Patroclus, right? Which is interesting because there's word games going on, right? And Patra is their country, and Cles is the glory of the country, right? By the way, if you have Cleopatra, it's that name in reverse, right? And Patroclus tells a story to Achilles to get him back into the fight about Cleopatra, so he takes his name and switches it. Achilles still not convinced, so Patroclus asks for his armor. And okay, you can borrow my armor. So he puts his armor on, and Patroclus is not a tank. He's a little guy, and so he's clunking around in Achilles' armor, and it's not too hard for the Trojans to say, "Hey, Hector, that can't be Achilles." And of course, he says, "You're right." So he goes and he kills him, right? Well, of course, that pisses off Achilles because that was his cousin. So he complains to his mom, "I killed him," right? And so she gives him new armor, instant armor, right? And he comes back. Pardon?
But then doesn't she tell him, like, if you go...
Oh yeah, there's the warning.
But he says, "I'm not going to live, I'm going for my name to live on."
Yeah, it's better to die with honor than to live a long life. It's kind of a Greek, motto in a way. So in any case, he goes back, and of course he kills Hector. But so how did Achilles get his name? He's been dishonored, right? But now here's the thing. This is all in poetry, and the Greeks are learning values and virtues and things in poetry, and it's song, it's a story, it's easy to remember. That's how the Greek education really worked until they started to write prose. And all of a sudden, they needed definitions for these words. When you had the poem, it taught you things. You might get one poem that teaches you one aspect of a virtue, and another poem teaches you another, and another, and another. And the thing is, you end up with, well, okay, so what's the definition of being pious? What's the definition of love? What's the definition of virtue? Right? And they had all these poetic references to it, and they start putting them all together, and they're incoherent. They don't go together. So Plato's job, as he's taking the muse, which is poetry, and making it right, now instead of it being orality, it's not an oral learning system. It's now going to be written down, so it's literacy, right? It's literary, right? And as a result of that, they need to make sense out of all these words that they've got. So all of the dialogues of Plato are questions about the definition of something significant. By the way, there's some neat things about there's codes in the dialogue. So if you go to the exact middle of the dialogue in Greek, the word is right there in the exact middle, and so on. It's all kinds of codes and things. It's kind of neat if you want to get into that stuff. But yes, Brandon.
Sorry, can you give a timeline from this oral tradition that then went into the writing? Like, how long did that take before the Greeks?
Just a
started
couple
writing?
of generations. There were already a couple other philosophers out there, and I should give you a quick. So this is on my old website. What is philosophy? Love of wisdom. You can have a look at that if you like. Why study philosophy?